Elizabeth Evans, and I'm a homeschooling mom of 4 young kids. I'm figuring this out as I go, but I'm here to talk to Bonnie, who has been writing and speaking on the subject for over a decade and has been homeschooling for 3 decades.
My name's Bonnie Landry. I've got 7 kids. They're ages 13 to 33. I've been homeschooling for 29 years. I'm a wife, a mom, a grandma. I'm a speaker and a writer, and I'm an advocate of joy. So we're here to provide this podcast so that homeschooling can look like you imagined it to be. Hey, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Great.
Good.
Yeah, enjoying some sunshine. It's been a very dreary July here so far, so we're enjoying this.
Oh, really?
So, I'm outside again. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
It's been
lovely.
hot here. It's been in the 90s the last couple days.
Yuck.
Just very
Yeah, well, I
unpleasant.
like it, but is it humid? It must be humid there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Humid, just sticky. Yeah. All right. Should we get started?
Yeah, let's get started.
Okay. So today's questions actually come from one person. Her name is Selena. And so let's start with the first one. Once you read a book and use it as the curriculum, how do you translate that to paper?
Okay. So I think, first of all, there's 2 ways of answering that, but I'll just give a little bit of context first. So I had run a class last month on how to use literature as the backbone of your education, okay? And so what I'm talking about when I am talking about using literature as the backbone, I'm talking about the family-centered kind of study that we would all sort of hope for, okay? So to maximize what you can do with literature, I'm just going to say this in a nutshell. We spent sort of a couple of hours talking about this in this particular class. But what we talked about was that in order to make literature come to life so that you can use it as all of your social studies, all of your geography, all of your history, all of your culture study, and you can also study science and music and art as offshoots of those things, that you need some tools and sort of some atmosphere in place in order to make that happen most effectively, okay? So Selena's asking this question: how do you then translate that onto paper, okay? So I think that could mean 2 things. One is, how do I translate that into marks? And how do I translate that into what I record of what we do, okay? I think the other part of that question is, how do we turn discussion-based study into productivity, okay? What the kids are putting out to show what they understand, to show what they've learned, to show that they've put time and effort into this particular study, okay? So maybe let's break that up into sort of the 2 different things, but I'd like to do the second one first. So how do we take a historical study of social studies and turn that into something that the kids do, something that they have to show for their study? Because I think probably that was the bigger part of this that she was asking in her questions. So I think a lot of times as homeschooling parents in particular, I think we maybe put a little too much focus on productivity, right? Productivity is often the tool for us as parents to show what our kids have learned, okay?
Right.
What they're able to know, what they're able to produce, whether they could do a quiz, whether they could write an essay on a particular topic. And that's kind of the proof that they've gained something of value from this, okay? We have something concrete. So firstly, when kids are young, I think that we need to focus less on productivity, because it doesn't matter that much. If they want to produce something, that's different. As they get older, of course, we're going to want some productivity in terms of how engaged they are in what's going on, okay? We can usually get a pretty good bead on that simply by what kind of discussions we're having with them, okay? And how interested they are in the research and discussion that happens as you're reading a book together, okay? Not always the case, but for the most part, especially if you've been homeschooling for a little while, you will have a pretty good idea of how engaged your child is in what it is you're you're doing, right? Because they're asking questions. That's the main way we're going to know that. You're asking questions and asking good questions.
Right.
And it gives you opportunity to look up those questions and answer them. Uh, when we don't see that level of engagement, we can assume that the child is probably not engaged enough in this particular topic that they're going to want to produce anything to prove their engagement.
Right.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So what's more important then is to think about salting the oats, right? So you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink unless you salt the oats. If you salt the oats, you can then create interest, okay? Say, for example, I was studying Vikings, and I've got 5 kids that I'm studying with. Some of those kids are going to be more interested in Vikings than others, all right?
Right.
Some kids are going to be more interested in the weapons that Vikings used. Some are going to be more interested in the politics or the religion of the Vikings. Some are going to be more interested in the exploration done by the Vikings. So altogether, each of those kids is going to bring into your discussion the thing that they're interested in, right? And that
Right.
is going to sort of enliven the discussion for everybody. So if you wanted a child to produce something, say an essay or a piece of writing, a paragraph or whatever, on a particular topic that they're not interested in, it's going to be much, much harder to teach them how to write. So we need to, if they're really interested, yes, they're going to write, okay? If they're not interested, get them to write about something else. The skill of writing really has nothing to do with Vikings.
Right.
Okay. So we have to sort of adapt our thinking to remember that, okay, writing will go more smoothly if they're writing about something they're actually interested in, right?
Mm-hmm.
We want to cover Vikings, and we're going to cover it as far as we can to the interest level that we can, but you can't force somebody to know something, right? You can't
Right.
force somebody to like something. It's just not possible.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to make it as, and I don't mean doing a song and dance, I mean mostly choosing really good books that would make the study of Vikings interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, that requires a little bit of research into what good books would be appropriate to
Right.
make the life of Vikings really clear. If then, they were interested enough in Vikings that, okay, we're moving along, we're studying the history, they're going to retain as much as they are able to retain relative to their age, interest level, ability to listen, all of that, and you're going to revisit Vikings. If you're homeschooling for the long haul, you're going to revisit that every few years. So you don't need to get too wound up about sort of production, okay? However, what I found is one of the greatest ways in my family to salt the oats, so to speak, when my kids were younger. Now, this didn't work the same way with my sons, but with my daughters, when in the first probably 10 years of our homeschooling, when we were studying a historical era, what we did was we decided to do a project that was related to that historical era that really, really was interesting to them,
Mm-hmm.
so that they would want to write and engage and do research on their own and spend time getting to know their topic, so that we sort of had a platform to share with other people. Now, we're a family, our probably our biggest spiritual gift as a family is hospitality, right? We have a lot of people over, we have company, friends, we run events, things like that. So that's something we're really comfortable with. So this wouldn't resonate with everybody, but I'll give some alternate suggestions if you're not a family who would be willing to have 40 people over at your house for a party, right? So the kinds of things we did, we had a medieval feast a couple of times, right, where my kids had to plan a medieval feast with me.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now I'm leading the helm. I'm not leaving it in their hands to do that. I'm the one sort of getting the momentum going for this. Okay, let's read some books on that. What would a medieval feast look like? What kind of food would they serve? What kind of recipes? So we did cooking. We found recipes. We determined how food would be served. We discerned what kind of servants they would have, what kind of entertainment they would have, what kind of people they would invite, what kind of people would hold a medieval feast.
Mm-hmm.
It's not obviously not poor people, it's not serfs,
Right.
and so it became this really 3-month-long study into hosting a medieval dinner, and we had about 40 people over and had this massive medieval dinner with all the courses and, you know, all entertainment and all kinds of stuff.
Wow.
So that got my kids completely jazzed
Yeah.
about producing, if you know what I'm
Yeah.
saying, right?
Yeah.
And so, uh, you know, I'll just give you a couple of other examples of things that we did. We had a Roman museum. So when the year we studied ancient Rome, we had a museum. So the kids had to sort of give examples of kind of artifacts and various things that you might find in a Roman village, say.
Okay.
And so they had to research all of that. They had to write some paragraphs in order to, oh, okay, well, and so they would choose within the big umbrella idea of ancient Rome, they would choose the particular area that they were interested in, whether it was cooking or crafts or sculpting or what kind of toys Roman kids played with or whatever. They would choose those things, and then they would write an article or a couple of articles on those things. And they might gather some pictures, they might do some drawings, you know, they would sort of figure out their way of, you know, their booth then
Yeah.
that they presented could be opened up to the public,
Hmm.
and the people could come through and see what they had done, their grandparents,
Yeah.
their aunts and uncles, their friends. And we actually, sometimes we brought in other families into the same thing. So we would say, would you be interested in running the apothecary booth, or would you be interested in talking about at your booth showing pictures of, you know, like a science fair in a sense.
Yeah.
Everybody's got a booth, but they would choose the topic that they wanted to present.
Yeah.
So these are great forums
Yeah.
for putting it out there for people to see what you've done.
Right.
Okay, so the productivity is high.
Yeah.
Okay, because they're working towards a project, you know.
Yeah.
So
Well,
that was
and
tons of fun.
as you're talking about this, I was thinking there's been a couple times in my schooling, you know, I wasn't homeschooled, but I think about in grade school, one year we had to do presentations on the states. We got to pick a state.
Fun.
And my uncle lives in Washington. And so I picked Washington, and he would send me postcards and things that I could use. And
Awesome.
my parents had gone a couple times, and they had brought back ash from Mount St. Helens. And so I brought that
Cool.
to show my, you know, and so I got all excited about
You're
it because,
jazzed, right?
right, I got
Yeah.
to pick the state I wanted to do, and I got to research it and study it. And then the other thing I can think of was in college, I went to John Paul the Great Catholic University. And so that was when Dr. Michael Barber was a professor there. And
Okay.
we were studying like religious art. And so he had a list of paintings we could choose from to research and write about. So when we went to Rome, we could actually see the painting. And so
Cool.
I picked Caravaggio because he's one of my favorite painters. And so that was really exciting to write about the medium he uses and stuff. And if you're watching on YouTube, I have a Caravaggio behind me. It's
Oh,
Doubting
fun.
Thomas.
Okay. Oh, fun.
So anyway, it was really cool. And so that spoke to me how you were saying, you know, you let
Yeah,
them choose, and it gets them excited about something.
exactly. And if they can own some of that, it just makes it so much more interesting and fun. Plus, because you're dealing with multiple ages, they can participate and contribute, you know, whatever is appropriate for their age, you know,
Yeah.
including, you know, when my boys were little, they would say want to do some drawings, you know, and if that's all they can contribute was drawings, they're 6 years old and whatever, that's what they want to put into this. But of
Yeah.
course they're thrilled that people are coming to their house, and they're thrilled that they get to dress up and, you know, all of those things. So
Yeah.
it's a really neat thing. So that's how we brought a lot of excitement, you know, salted the oats
Hmm.
for a lot of our study, you know, particularly in the sort of early years of our homeschooling. And then what we would do is we would gather up all the stuff, including all the pictures we had taken and various other things. We would gather up all the stuff of the study and then put it into a great big scrapbook. So not only have we had this amazing social venue, you know, and
Hmm.
had people over to see what we've been doing and had people involved in what we're doing. We've also now got a memory of it that's going to last, you know, forever, right? I still have
Yeah.
these beautiful books that my kids put together when they're little. And that's been those books have been fantastic for us to share. I will take some pictures of them actually and put them in the
Yeah.
show notes. I'll put them in a blog post and then put them in the show notes, because I think people would really appreciate seeing what kinds of things you are doing, right?
Yeah.
One of the things that I was thinking about over the last couple of weeks as we've been talking more in our podcast is maybe having a specific history. So taking these ideas that we're talking about today and giving some really specific ideas for a particular study that you could do with your kids, and what kind of resources you might want to include to salt the oats, to make that happen, to make that productive, right?
Right.
And so if you work towards a project, guaranteed you're going to see productivity. Your kids are going to have something they want to write about if they're excited about it, right?
Yeah.
My boys, less excited about doing that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Right? More excited about field trips, watching a really good movie on the topic, sort of engaging them in other ways. But it just was something that, after 10 years or so, we sort of morphed into other things. But that was certainly a great way of getting them, getting my older kids involved, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to flip for a moment. Is there any questions about that before I flip into sort of the other meaning of productivity?
No,
Okay.
not from me.
Okay. So how does that, so Selena's asking, how does that relate to sort of, how does that get on paper, what you're doing? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a trickier question, because what I think in many ways, what you're talking about really is if you're talking about that kind of getting it onto paper, you're talking about how does that relate to marks, or how would that relate to a report card?
Right.
And it's a good question. So first of all, for me anyways, the first, 10 years of my children's education, I just don't give a flying rip about that. I mean, every year I keep records of what my kids do, but in terms of creating a report card or an individual record for primary and elementary students, it just doesn't matter. I have a folder of the things they've done, and it just doesn't matter. They're going to absorb what they're going to absorb, right?
Yeah.
And I don't feel compelled in any way to have them produce anything regarding that, and also getting any sort of marks down, because then starting grade 8, 9, 10, we're really going to, start sort of making sure that we're kind of keeping records of what they do, and having a paper trail that's more specific to that child, okay?
Right.
As opposed to this was just our family study. So a lot of the times when I'm teaching older kids, like say we're studying something, Canadian history, for example. When we're studying Canadian history with older kids, I, first of all, have an expectation that they're going to be engaged in the study that we're doing, okay? If they're not engaged, I'm going to bring that up with them as, hey, listen, this is actually a class that when you go off to university needs to be, recorded as your social studies. You're required to have social studies. So, I think that you need to think about your level of engagement, because a lot of, I have to give you a mark on it to go on a transcript. That's a reality. And so I'm not going to give you a mark if you're, totally tuned out. So let's talk about ways that A, we can make this more engaging, and B, how you can also take some responsibility for, actually learning something, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of times with older kids, and I'm talking, more grades 10, 11, 12, I'll have them do some independent reading. So if we're reading Canadian history, I probably have a couple of books, and that might be more historical fiction that's more geared towards adult reading,
Mm-hmm.
or I'm going to have them read books or articles from the encyclopedia about Canadian history, right? So I'm going to find specific things, and we're going to discuss that, right? Is okay, if this is, going to be your social studies class for grade 10, here's the expectations that I would have of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
That you'd be doing some independent study on your own in the same topic, okay?
Yeah.
And then, are those the things you'd like to write an essay on? If they hate Canadian history, this hasn't really happened yet, but if they did, I might say, okay, so you need to do some writing this year. Obviously, that's important that you produce, you're in grade 10, you need to produce 2 or 3 or however many essays this year. And I would like you to be writing. I want you to learn to write. That's important. You have to learn to write if you're going to go off to post-secondary, or just for life itself. And writing is an important thing.
Yeah.
So if you don't like Canadian history, what are some other possibilities. You can write on anything you want. I'm okay with that. It doesn't have to, you don't have to produce about this particular thing. You do have to be engaged, and you do have to do some reading. And I'm probably going to ask you some questions about the stuff that you're reading, so that I know I'm getting some feedback. I know that they're understanding the material. I know that they're, engaged in the material. And they might say, oh, I don't know what I want to write on. You pick something. I might say, okay, well, what aspect of Canadian history might be interesting? Like Canada's involvement in World War II. Would that interest you? Or Confederation, when we gained our freedom, from our separation from Britain, what part, or the voyageurs, the first people who came here and, explored the country when it was still, really wild and it was just Indigenous people. What interests you?
Yeah.
Or prehistory of Canada. And so through that process of discussion, we're absolutely going to find some topic that, that interests them. And if we don't, we're going to choose something that isn't anything to do with Canadian history, but probably Canadian history, our social studies class for Canada could include almost anything. If they loved art and nothing else, we could talk about Canadian artists. If they loved poetry and nothing else, we could talk about Canadian poets. We could talk about the indigenous species of animals here. There's a lot of ways to skin a cat, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, that's kind of how those things would roll out in terms of how do I, mark this? How do I create a transcript out of this material, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this might be a topic for a future show. And I'm still with little ones that are still in primary grades, but I realized I don't know, as a homeschooling mom, how to help my kids get into college.
Right.
Like you're talking about filling out transcripts and stuff. So maybe that doesn't pertain to this topic, but that might be.
I would say that's a topic, really, a couple of our shows we should be addressing that. I think it'd be really important, because it's not just people with kids addressing high school that are concerned about a transcript. I mean, often, especially the dads, really want to know where this is going to go with their kids, right? And those are great questions. They should want to know. Now, things might be different. Things might look a lot different in terms of the landscape of what homeschooling looks like and what college looks like even in 10 or 15 years.
Right.
But, it's good to have an idea of what's going to happen here, what's going to be, what we're going to be faced with, right? And so, I think that would be a great topic, not only how to prepare for college, but how then to get into college, how to set high school up in such a way that college would actually be attainable.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
What are our options?
Right.
And there's a lot of great resources for that. So I think it'd be a great discussion topic for sure. So if anybody wants to submit specific questions about that, I'm just going to switch here. If anyone wants to submit specific questions about that, then feel free to do so, because I think that would be nice to know what your specific questions are.
All right. Well, then let's move on. The next question is, once, back to having a book, let's say historical fiction or just a history book in general. If you want your children to write something about the book, what does that look like?
Right. So usually what I would say to my kids, now it's age dependent to some degree, but if I wanted my kids to write something, I would first talk with them about what they would like to write about, because it's important to me that when they're learning the skill of writing, that we take some of the angst out of it by writing what they enjoy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, that it would start there, just with what is it you'd like to write about? What catches your attention mostly? Or what question would you like answered, right? And for my kids, I really want them to perfect a paragraph before they move on to essays. And so actually this show will be over by the time we're doing this, but by the time this show will have aired by the time I'm doing this paragraph writing class. But to me, it's really pointless to ask kids to write anything if they haven't really perfected a paragraph. So we spend a lot of time on really understanding a paragraph and knowing how to write one, so that's easy, right? Once a paragraph is easy, that's the stepping stone to all other writing. So for my kids, that's where I would start is, hey, do you want to write a paragraph about this particular thing? And we often do model writing. I'm a big fan of the Institute for Excellence in Writing. I'll put their stuff in the show notes.
Okay.
The Institute for Excellence in Writing just has an approach to writing that I really, really appreciate. And they start off using a model so that the child has something in front of them. They don't have to come up with their own original ideas. They have something in front of them that they use as a template. They develop a keyword outline from that text. They develop their sentences on their own from that text, and then they make the text their own in terms of style and substance, okay? So those are the sort of 3 parts to the writing program of Institute for Excellence in Writing. So for me, if that's how I'm going to approach writing on a particular topic like Canadian history, I'm going to say, okay, find a paragraph or a soundbite of information that you find really interesting, and let's use that as our model, and then you can make it your own. Okay. And in the meantime, you can be learning about this particular topic as we're using this model for our writing.
Okay.
Right. So that'd be the short answer.
Okay. All right. Okay. And then what does the step from reading and sort of learning through those rabbit holes that we've talked about, where you go get an encyclopedia, and how do you take that and then move to putting something on paper or doing a project to reflect what you've read?
Right. Well, so usually for me, when I see my kids being excited about something, so if we're reading and the topic that comes up is Viking ships, and I'll say, oh man, get out the encyclopedia. Let's have a look at what they mean when they're talking about Viking ships. And then, the immediate response is usually like, oh wow, look at the Viking ships. They love that kind of thing. Look how that compares. And then we compare, what's that like now? Like, we live on an island, right? So, how does that compare with the ferries? How big is it compared to the ferries? What kind of power does it run on? Relative to modern boats, how does it differ from kind of boats we see, or the kind of other boats through history? What is a Viking? What's the purpose of a Viking ship? Why is it shaped that way? So as we're sort of delving into that kind of question, if I see their eyes light up about something, I'll say, hey, would you guys like to do a little project on Viking ships? Would you like to maybe watch a movie about Vikings and see what that's really like? Maybe, and then from there, the Salting the Oats. I always have lots of really good books lying around as well, lots of eyewitness books and things like that are really going to jazz them. I'll say, oh my gosh, look at this. This is super cool, where it gives you a dissection of a Viking ship, or, the Vikings in their full regalia, so it's when, being sensitive to when you can see excitement building, even if it's not amongst all your kids, but amongst a couple of them. Okay, where can we go with this? Right? Maybe there's a great show or a documentary that you could watch on Viking ships. It would be great. National Geographic has all kinds of, amazing stuff on historical things and the natural world that really can get kids excited about things. For a while we had a Viking display on at our local museum, right? That was there for a year or something, a traveling display. So we made sure that we went to that, and where else can I get information about this particular topic, right? So plan a great field trip, plan some kind of a project, when watch that moment where you see their eyes light up, right? That's when we can really say, okay, would you be interested in finding out more? Right. Yeah. And sometimes you're just glossing a topic. It depends on the kids. It depends on their age. Depends on their interest level. I think I've told you this before, but one year I had planned to study Canadian history with my kids. And we got about to November, and then we started talking about the Underground Railway, right? Which was the trail that escaped slaves would follow into Canada, where they couldn't be where they have immunity, and my kids were where we live, and the lifestyle they've been brought up in, racism just isn't an experience they've had, right? And so they were just amazed, flattened by the idea that any other human being could think that another human being is their property.
Right.
Okay. And so
Right.
that was, they were just they just could not square that idea in their brains, right?
Hmm.
And so we started talking about slavery in its many forms all through history, right?
Hmm.
What slavery looked like. But we ended up spending the entire rest of the school year on slavery, right? So not just American slavery, but slavery all over the world, and um, the moral questions around slavery and all of that. And it was an amazing study, but I had to be willing to just say, okay, you know what, we can study Canada and right now they're completely engrossed in this topic, and this is
Right.
important for them to know. It's important for them
Yeah.
to understand. And so it was one of those sort of calls I made, and then partway through the school year, just like, okay, let's go with it. Right.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's a perfect example of the beauty of homeschooling. Because
Yeah.
I think about my own childhood and the things that interest me, especially about history, we didn't talk about in school. Like
Yeah.
one thing, and I think um, I can relate to your kids and their, I guess, curiosity about slavery because they couldn't understand it. And that was the same thing
Yeah.
I experienced about the Holocaust. That to
Right.
me, I was
Yeah.
I couldn't, I couldn't understand how that happened. And so I read and I wanted to learn about, and I picked up historical fiction books and, Diary of Anne Frank, that kind of stuff, because, school wasn't teaching me about it.
Yeah.
It was barely an afterthought, because
Yeah.
we didn't really even get to World War II history in grade school or high school.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and it's a tough topic, but my goodness, there's so many things that can be learned, life lessons that can be learned,
mhm,
and understanding, human beings from the Holocaust, from slavery, from, any difficult period of history, or just a difficult particular challenge that a person has, when you're reading, say a historical fiction book, or not, you're reading The Lord of the Rings, there's so much food for discussion
mhm,
on, you know well, let's talk about Frodo, let's talk about Bilbo. What were their personalities, what were their personal struggles, what was it they wanted,
yeah,
you know and so, we need to really think about that, and think about all the lessons that are in the books that we read, and be willing to just go down those paths, right? And I
right,
mean, you might find that your younger kids aren't really interested, but your older kids, they have big questions, and they want to ask them, and they want to delve into them,
mhm,
but that's what the stuff of life is made of.
yeah,
Those discussions with your teenagers and preteens about the big moral questions, and the terrible injustices done in the world to
right,
individuals and to groups of people, right? This
yeah,
beautiful food for growth, right?
right,
Kind of what I've been working on over the last couple of weeks is putting together a kind of a package of resources for studying ancient cultures. And so maybe next week's topic, would be good to sort of talk about, okay, these ideas in a more sort of comprehensive, specific way. Okay, what would that actually look like if you're studying ancient cultures, which of course can be applied to any other aspect of literature, any other historical period, but
right,
just sort of an idea of what that actually looks like, and what kind of resources are available to us, and what we're trying to accomplish, and what it might look like at different age ranges. So I'll sort of take myself back in history, and maybe, back to 10 years ago, when I had maybe a 5-year-old to, an 18-year-old, and sort of approach it from, okay, if we were studying ancient cultures, or the ancient world, what would that have looked like on the day to day, right?
right, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And another thought I had was, since this episode will air after your intro to writing a
Yeah.
paragraph class, if people hear what you've had to say and are interested, and it's too late for that class, maybe they can comment or send a message or something. And if we get enough people, maybe we could do it again.
Absolutely. I'd be happy to do it again.
Yeah.
If people are interested, that's definitely something I'm game for. Yeah, and I think that the class, the next time I run a class, it will be. I've had a lot of input from people that they would like a class on discipline that husbands, couples come to. So
Mhm.
I think that sometime more towards the end of July, I'll run a class, and then I probably won't do one in August, just because my daughter's actually coming out from Ottawa and her and her family are spending several weeks out here, so I'm excited about that. So that will probably be the next one that comes up, so people can keep an eye out for it on my blog.
Yeah.
My website is www.bonnielandry.ca, and you can link to my blog and the podcast and all kinds of great stuff there.
Yeah.
Hey, I should put my YouTube channel on that. I never thought of that.
Yeah.
Let's do that.
Yep. That was good.
Yeah. So so let's call that a wrap, and we'll sort of continue this study next week and in a little more sort of in depth, more specifically.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Take care. Bye.
Bye.